This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I don't know if I'm getting sick, if it's allergies. I've just been really lethargic for the past couple days. And I feel a lot better now that I got back from the gym. That definitely helped. I can't even call it congestion because it's not even that. I'm breathing perfectly fine at night when I sleep. You know, ever since I dropped that barbell on my face back in January, I'm worried that my septum hematoma dilly-bob is acting up again. Problem is, now that I'm living in a completely different place, can't use the same nose doctor that I went to. I'd have to find a whole new practitioner. Because I am not driving an hour both ways just to see a doctor. I'll be able to get through this podcast all right. Just be forewarned that my energy levels might not be as high. Because you all know I'm just a bundle of energy to begin with. We have to be here on the 5 Starr Wrestling Report podcast. It's what we're all about, baby. Fun, energy, and excitement. Hope everyone's doing well as we transition into the fall season. It's about to get a lot cooler in certain areas. So if you happen to be living in some of the colder climates, get your fall/winter apparel ready to go. Meanwhile, I'll be chugging along here with more wrestling talk. It is the Friday show. Means it's time to dive into some territory coverage. We got 3 shows to review this week. Be sure if you're checking out the show for the first time, subscribe, comment, and like. Check out the FSWR show on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays. As we move along through this retro deep dive on WCW, Mid-South, World Class, and WWF. We'll go ahead and start things off per usual with our Superstation TBS review. World Championship Wrestling. We've got another relatively short one to recap. I say relatively. It was still an hour. As we've been saying though, ever since Flair took the book and started overseeing the direction of the stories and angles, shows have been markedly better. Compare what we're getting now to what we were seeing even as recently as June or July of this year. It's like we're watching a whole different program. Again, things aren't perfect. They never are. But I'll take what we're getting now over anything the previous booking committee was responsible for perpetrating. Mainly Jim Herd. We began the show with a Lex Luger promo. I reiterate what I said a minute ago. Shows aren't perfect. Kidding aside, this is actually a good follow-up from a conversation we had the other week. So Luger made an open challenge to anybody on the active NWA roster that wants a shot at his US title. Then later on that same taping, Brian Pillman came out to cut a promo, basically telling Luger that he'll take the shot because he's one of them young whippersnappers that's looking to make a name for himself. And you might recall, one of the things we joked about was, how is Luger going to manage to squirm out of this one? Well, here's how they did it. It wasn't Luger insinuating that Pillman was too green or inexperienced. It wasn't that Luger didn't feel like it. No, the reason Luger couldn't compete with Pillman for the U.S. heavyweight title this week was, I am a busy champion, and I have other commitments, such as wrestling Mark Sartain. Yes, Luger's excuse for backing down from a challenge against Pillman was, I have to wrestle another job guy who I know I can easily mop the floor with. So Pillman, tough shit. You'll have to wait your turn. So this is all perfect heat getting stuff. Classic bad guy promo. Or as Luger called it here, champion's prerogative. We'll revisit that little cliffhanger later on. From there, we cut back to the ring for the Cuban Assassin versus Ranger Ross. First question right out of the block. I'm not the only one that forgot about Ranger Ross, right? They are still trying with this failed experiment. I guess in their head they rationalized it as, hey, Ranger's a former Marine vet. Let's put him in the ring with a Cuban. That'll get the people behind him. And you know, to their credit, it actually kind of worked. Temporarily. Were they cheering for Ranger Ross, or were they cheering for the honor and pride of America? You can be the judge of that. So while they're out there having this very bare bones TV match, Cornette and Ross were plugging the upcoming Halloween Havoc card. JC at one point started talking about the contract signing between the Road Warriors and the Skyscrapers in what he referred to as a dream match scenario. I can only imagine how difficult that was for Jim to say without choking on his own spit. A dream match involving the Road Warriors and the Skyscrapers. Says who? Get out of here with that shite. In what universe is a Dan Spivey match considered a dream match? Only to muscle marks like Jim Herd. And they also talked about some other stuff here, and to be honest, a lot of it sounded like they were just trying to pass time. Literally, here's the entire match in a quick summary. Ranger took 90% of the beating. He won with a fluke sunset roll-up at the end. Then the Cuban Assassin hit him from behind with the flag and waved it over his body. I failed to see how this did anything to help Ranger Ross maintain his credibility. Whatever shred he may have had left with the fans. And the tepid reaction for him going over was very telling. It's not even like the people cheered or booed him. They just sat there on their hands like, okay then, great. What else we got on this week's taping block? Like, I do kind of feel bad for Ranger Ross, because it's not like he was a dreadful worker or anything. He was just very bland and very boring. The polar opposite of Michael P.S. Hayes. He got to do a pre-tape promo when we came back from break. My God. You want to talk about a complete and utter burial segment? This was... Well, okay. Let me actually describe what Hayes said here so you don't think I'm jumping to any irrational conclusions. He began his promo by saying, "The NWA told me that I had to come out here and do a promo on the Dynamic Dudes. So myself and Jimmy Garvin drew a couple straws, and unfortunately I drew the shorter straw. Therefore, I got stuck with having to come out here and actually do the promo. And I was told that I have to speak on the Dynamic Dudes." So, before he delivers any actual thoughts on Johnny Ace or Shane Douglas, he is already dismissing them and treating them like inferior dorks. Then he started quoting Marvin Gaye and the Rolling Stones lyrics, eventually coming to the conclusion that the Dudes don't stand a chance at winning the World Tag Straps, which I then realized right as Hayes was finishing up here. Oh yeah, I forgot. The title match for Halloween Havoc is the Freebirds versus the Dudes. That sounds hysterically bad. You have one team that never likes to sell or do anything to cooperate with their opponents, and you've got another team that nobody likes and everybody wants to see get the shit kicked out of them. Problem is, the team that doesn't like to sell are the heels, and the team nobody likes or gives a shit about are the alleged babyfaces. Now, you want to talk about dream matches. That is what I would call a dream match scenario. What the hell is going to happen during that colossal freight train collision? Nobody knows. But it's going to be damn entertaining. So up next we have the Skyscrapers in a squash match with Tim Parker and Rick Ryder. For whatever reason, they decided to replay the Dan Spivey Dick Murdoch match from the other week. The one that I claim was the worst fucking thing I've ever seen on television. Yeah, of all things to replay from last week's episode, they chose that segment. So I fast-forwarded through most of that. And I was about to skip ahead another 30 seconds when I paused to watch what Sid was about to do to Rick Ryder. And I'm glad I stuck through it. He may have given the best airplane spin I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about the fireman's carry version. I'm talking about the one where the guy gets picked up into a razor's edge position and then flung around like a helicopter wing. Sid gave this move to Ryder. He legitimately launched him a good 10 feet in the air. I watched it in slow-mo at like half speed. It was a glorious fall from grace. Made the entire squash worth it just to see that 8-second spot. And then Spivey tagged in, hit a shitty powerbomb, and got the 3. Helicopter spin should have been the finish. Another bad timing comment from Jim Cornette during this match, where he tried to compare the bodies of the Skyscrapers to actual buildings. Right at the moment Spivey took off his ring jacket to reveal his absolutely non-physique. And I immediately responded with, "Nah, he still looks like a giant moist bag of pudding." Then we came back for a Dynamic Dudes promo. Poor Jim Cornette having to work overtime to put these guys over and get the people to care about him. You know, it's really unfortunate too, because I remember when I saw the Dudes on television for the first time, I obviously never liked them. I always thought they were dorky and comically over the top with the skater bro gimmick. Just the most dudical stoner personality types in the book. It's so annoying. But then I would occasionally hear Shane Douglas cut a promo, and, you know, even at like 4 or 5 years old, I was like, Hey, he's not a half-bad talker. Then, of course, you fast forward several years and he becomes one of the most talked about promos in ECW, and he was just doing crazy off-the-cuff heat promos every week. That was the one positive critique I could find in the dudes. The fact that Douglas could cut a halfway decent promo. And they basically talked about the match with the Freebirds at the pay-per-view and told them that if they keep underestimating them, it'll cost them the tag straps. Then Cornette made some weird comment about trying to patch things up between Johnny Ace and Stan. I don't know what he was talking about. And they never referenced it on the show again. I obviously know where the whole storyline is going, but contextually, the comment didn't make a whole lot of sense. And that brought us back to the ring for Bob Cook versus Tom Zank. Speaking of gimmicks and personalities that never registered with me as a kid. You know, like we talked about during the Clash review when Tom made his in-ring debut, he was solid in many aspects, but he just never had that type of it factor that made you think, oh, this guy's going to be a big star in wrestling someday. He was simply average. Like a mild cup of decaf coffee. It's still coffee, but it just doesn't have the taste or flavor of really strong dark roast coffee. Or I guess another good food comparison would be something like a low-fat Twinkie. I mean, yeah, it's still a Twinkie on paper, just without the ingredients that make Twinkies good. Has anybody actually ever tasted a sugar-free candy bar or any kind of snack item? I don't even think I could digest it. It just sounds gross. Anyway. You know, the thing about Tom Zank I never understood, and I still really don't understand it to this day. You got a guy like Zank that can actually do some moderately good flashy offense. He's out there in this match doing missile drop kicks and cross body dives. Some rather impressive looking high risk offense. And Zank wasn't a small guy by any stretch. Not to say he was Bam Bam Bigelow sized, but I mean, he was a solid 230. You didn't see many guys doing that kind of flashy offense back then. But at the same time, they're really trying to push his finisher and get that over. Of all moves for them to try to establish with this guy, the sleeper hold. You've got a guy that can actually do some shit in the ring, and your idea for a big finish is a sleeper? Just doesn't compute. It's like all the stuff I complain about with modern wrestling, where everybody goes out there and does 450 splashes and all this ridiculous video game garbage. It can't beat anybody. But they'll kick out of everything, then somebody will win with a flash roll-up out of nowhere after we see everything but the kitchen sink get thrown out. It's like I said before, you know, outside that brief run with Pillman as a tag team in 1990, Zank just never did anything for me. Oh, and because I can't stomach the idea of actually referring to him as such, I'll just throw it out there. The Z-Man? Horrible gimmick name. So that brought us to Lex Luger versus Richard Sartain, U.S. Heavyweight title bout, or what was intended to be a title match. I still have to pause and make sure I don't actually say Michael Sartain by accident. Not that I would expect my audience to know who that is anyway. Richard Sartain. And like we talked about, this match was supposed to be reserved for Pillman, but Luger's got his priorities straight. And while we did get Luger and Pillman here, it was not exactly how he probably envisioned it. He being Brian. Too many pronouns, pal. And all things considered, as short and concise as all this was, it was flawlessly done. He had Pillman go out there and get on the house mic to tell Luger that if he's half the man he claims to be, title or no title, he'll fight Pillman right now. So we get a momentary flash of heat as Luger tries to jump Pillman, getting into the ring. Pillman makes his own comeback on Luger and lays him out with air Pillman. And everybody in the room pops as you see Luger bailing out to the floor and heading toward the back. And right as the people are goading Luger to get back into fight, you eventually get Luger trying to make a second beeline to go after Pillman. And once again, he stands his ground and gets thwarted. And this time Luger runs to the back with his tail tucked between his legs. Again, very simplistic, but it was all well executed. And here's the thing too, just to kind of draw an analogy, unlike what we're seeing here with Bill Watts during the fall of '84 in Mid-South, where he's attempting to force over a new top regional babyface, what they're doing with Pillman here in '89 is the polar opposite of that. Like, this is all being naturally and organically done. There's no forcing Pillman on people as a babyface. This is how you constructively build up a new young star and try to prepare him for higher status on the card. Now, again, we all know things didn't really go according to plan when it came to the direction of Pillman's booking, which is a whole other matter. But in terms of what we're seeing with him right now, the booking of Brian Pillman is absolutely spot on. And it really is a shame that the Luger-Pillman feud only lasted a couple months. I mean, looking back, I always thought they could have milked more out of that program than they did. I wouldn't even really argue they should have put the strap on Pillman, although they could have. But the fact that the feud was over by what? November of this year? I don't know, it just seems they could have gotten more out of it than they did. So following that, we come back for what was basically a compilation package to help promote the Ric Flair-Terry Funk feud. We know they're set to do Battle in the Omni and an I Quit match. So in order to hype that, they went through a brief timeline to cover everything that happened post-Clash. Going back to the September 16th episode, which I don't think we reviewed. It was the episode where Jim Herd suspended Terry over the plastic bag angle, where he tried to suffocate Flair and put him out of commission. Like the best part of the clip is, while Terry's having a mental breakdown over being suspended, he's trying to explain why Flair should be the one being fined and suspended. So he takes off his giant elbow brace to reveal a scab the size of a fucking brush burn. And of course, that was from the attack when Flair bludgeoned Funk's elbow with a branding iron, which I don't think we ever saw take place, but we'll just assume Funk's not lying for the sake of argument. It's great, though, because he's overselling this to a ridiculous degree, and you're expecting to see this giant gash. It's literally the size of a pimple. But Funk's having a complete meltdown over the whole thing. And then, of course, we came to learn that Flair paid off the fine and suspension to make sure he could actually get a sanctioned match with Funk in the Omni. Then to cap off the whole pre-tape, the greatest green screen capture in all of pro wrestling. It's Funk standing in front of a still shot of him in the hospital. He's talking about how the man we see in this image is sick and physically ill, but the man you see standing before you is now mentally sick and twisted. And he's also on a mission to become the NWA World Champion. And it's truly one of those promo segments where you listen to Funk's delivery. Whenever somebody asks you, why did you become a wrestling fan? You just play shit like this and let the promo speak for itself. I mean, nobody cuts promos like this in wrestling anymore, man. It's not even close. And frankly, it's not even fair to compare anybody to Terry Funk. But nobody has that type of cadence or delivery. It's not even teachable. The way Funk spoke was just so raw and so chilling. In a good way. It's why I say, if you blindfolded me and played a Terry Funk promo without me knowing who it is, I could still probably guess it's him. Just by hearing his voice. Because nobody else spoke like him. I mean, just like how nobody spoke the way Dusty did. You play a Dusty promo for somebody without them knowing who it is, they'll be able to guess immediately. And if they really know their history, they might be able to even tell you what promotion and when it happened. But I'm not here to play Guess the Program. That's Cornette's thing. Moving on. We had a Ric Flair response to everything we just saw. First, he put over Pillman and said that if Flair can do to Funk what he just saw Pillman do to Luger, the entire Atlanta region will be up in flames for 30 days. Then, of course, he plugged the I Quit match and said the word quit doesn't exist in his vocabulary. But the fans in the Omni will get to witness a bloodbath firsthand, because that's exactly what the match will entail. Then it is usual, the NWA is the place to be tirades. We also had some moderately great clips for Wrestling Out of Context compilations. The amount of times Flair talked about coming for guys like Muda, Funk, and Slater. There's one thing we love hearing heterosexual males talk about in a wrestling promo. It's them coming for other men. Yeah. Before I start getting down that dark rabbit hole, let's quickly go over this Teddy Long, Paul Ellering promo with Ross. Obviously, they were talking about the Road Warriors Skyscrapers tag match. Or as Teddy called them, the Road Runners. Nah. Sorry, Theodore. Baron Von Raschke already beat you to that a few years ago. So he put over his men and claimed that the Skyscrapers aren't sweating the Road Warriors because they're just as big and just as tough as they are. Which is part of the problem. To which Ellering responded by saying that hungry dogs are dangerous dogs. And one thing Precious Paul doesn't do is lay money down on the line when he knows he can't win. And his money is on the Road Warriors walking out of Philly as the victors. I personally would not be laying down any kind of money in Philly. At least not in a public building. I know Paul was a shooter in his heyday, but Philly crowd's a wild bunch. And then to close things out, we had Animal coming down to run down Trent Knight in a 30-second squash. And they pitch right back to the interview station where Animal and Paul did another promo on the Skyscrapers match. There's, well, it's weird. JR kept bringing up this issue where apparently Teddy was complaining about the contracts not being signed yet, even though they were told earlier in the show that the match was officially signed. So JR tries to clarify this with Paul, and, well, Paul basically starts dancing around the question entirely and starts making obscure Mark Twain comments about the weather. And I'm sitting there like, so is the match happening or not, dude? Why are we working this mystery over whether or not the match is signed? Is that supposed to be part of the story? Not that I'm fawning over the idea of having to watch the match in the first place. I just don't get the back and forth over the status of the contracts. Whatever. It is strange that the Thunderdome cage match barely got a mention this week. But by God, they are really pushing that fucking Road Warrior Skyscrapers match hard. Here's the funny thing, too. I remember absolutely nothing about that match except for the shitty finish. And the only reason I remember the shitty finish was that it was such a wet popcorn fart. They immediately said, okay, this feud was a complete bust. We're just going to move the Skyscrapers on to feuding with the Steiners now. It all goes back to what I said about pairing Hawk and Animal up against guys their size. It never worked. It was always a styles clash. But they just kept trying to experiment with it. Probably another one of Hurt's genius ploys to run the Road Warriors out of the fucking company. And he got his wish the following year. So I already kind of touched on the ongoing theme with Mid-South when I mentioned Bill Watts trying to artificially force over new top babyfaces. More precisely, new top black babyfaces. Because you got to replace JYD somehow, right? You got to fill the void. And I've already talked about the circumstances 100 times. You already know the deal there, so I'm not going to belabor the point. The subject of that current conversation is Master G, and he was part of last week's big angle during the Midnight Express versus Master G Brickhouse Brown tag match. A match that was now reordered to take place this week because of all the controversy surrounding the finish and everything after the fact. So as I went back and replayed a good chunk of that match, we then saw the post-match where all the heels restrained Master G while Buddy Landau strapped him with a leather belt. Kind of strange to think that they ran the exact same match back a week later and didn't bother to add any stipulations. They didn't even try to make it no DQ or anything. Although the babyfaces did come up with a solution this week. They were ahead of the curve. And so we waste no time jumping into the action. It is the Midnights versus Brickhouse and Master G. Round 2. Cornette also made sure to give Watts his 7 days notice that he still wants his $30,000 check back. Otherwise, the Midnights are going to leave Mid-South with the tag straps. And again, we covered all that in detail last week, so go listen to the last review if you want more context. Once again, the work between Beautiful Bobby and Brickhouse in the opening few minutes was outstanding. And while those two are going at it, You start to see the people getting up from their seats as they're watching the army of babyfaces start making their way down to ringside. And this was absolutely perfect because Cornette sees the entire babyface locker room emptying out. They're not in a rush. They're not running down to chase off Cornette or Hercules. But Cornette sees the incoming opposition, and like a total cartoon character, he just realizes, shit, we need to scram. So he grabs Hercules and drags him to the back. And that is all it took for the heels to get outsmarted here. And all the while, Dennis and Bobby are standing in the ring like, Corny, where are you going? We kind of need you here. We might need to cheat. So you get all the babyfaces standing around ringside, not acting as lumberjacks, mind you, because it's not an officially sanctioned lumberjack match. They are specifically out there to ensure that Cornette can't pull any trickery. And it's great because there's a moment where Master G's running wild on Bobby and Dennis, and they both eventually roll out to the floor. And you see Dennis wave his arms and be like, "Ref, hey ref, these guys are going to attack us." And again, it is not a sanctioned lumberjack match. So the babyfaces cannot legally touch the Midnights without risking disqualification. But I love Dennis's interaction with the guys on the floor. He's just overselling everything to a ridiculous degree. Meanwhile, everyone's standing around the ring like, "Nah, dude, we're just here to make sure Cornette doesn't try to pull any shit." So the match continues as the Midnights cut off Brickhouse to get a little bit of heat. Then it built to Master G's hot tag where he comes in and runs wild for a minute. He ends up drop-kicking Dennis over the top to the floor. Takes a great bump over the guardrail, too. And then he hooks Bobby in some kind of calf crusher hold. And beautiful Bobby actually submitted here. So Master G got a clean win over one half of the tag team champs. Of course, it was non-title. But this worked out tremendously. And it was a total stark contrast to everything we saw the other week. Now, one might argue, isn't it kind of silly to beat the tag team champions like that when they're right in the middle of a title program with the Fantastics? It does seem a bit odd considering the timing. But I personally didn't have an issue with this. I mean, it tied up a lot of loose ends from the other week. And it also gives Watts a little more leverage over Cornette's threats to leave Mid-South with the belts. Because now he can come out next week and be like, "Alright, well, your guys lost a match to Master G and Brickhouse. So I'm booking another rematch, but this time it's going to be for the belts." Now, I don't remember the specifics of where they take all this, but it would seem that's the direction they're going. And so then we come back for Buddy Landel versus Johnny Mantell. There's a fun little tag team pairing that never happened. The team of Landel and Mantell. Now, that would be the one time I might have actually tolerated Johnny Mantell in the ring. Put him in a heel tag team with Budrow. That could have been interesting. It's a solid wrestling match. One of those classic psychological Buddy matches where he acts so cocky and brash, but can't get anything going offensively. Like every time he tries to get some offense mustered up, he gets cut off and taken back down to the mat. Then finally, Mantell missed a running charge in the corner and hurt his shoulder. And Buddy took control and worked him over until we get this epically awkward closing minute. So Mantell hits Budrow with a running knee lift, and as he's going for the pin, Budrow powers out and sends Mantell right on top of poor Pee Wee Anderson's legs. For the record, I have no idea how he didn't shatter an ACL with all that body weight landing on him. But that wasn't the awkward part. So Pee Wee's down selling his buddy fishes around in his trunks for a gimmick. And as he shoots off Mantell into the ropes, Mantell has to literally step over Pee Wee's body to avoid trampling and killing him. So you see Mantell running at this really out of control speed toward the ropes, but right as he's about to accidentally stomp on Pee Wee, he has to very carefully step over him and then run right back toward Buddy. And then Buddy clocked him with a right hook and pinned him. It was one of those moments where you realize, yeah, they did not really coordinate that spot well enough. Oh well. Still a fun TV moment. And then we had a legendary Mid-South moment. I've been waiting with bated breath to talk about this one ever since Adrian Street made his debut. I remember this exact segment like the back of my hand. Not only because it's iconic, but it's one of those risque moments where you think, man, how in the fuck did this not start a riot in the Deep South in 1984? It was so unlike anything people had ever seen in wrestling during this time. Maybe except for Memphis, because I think Adrian did something similar before he came to work in Mid-South. Which is probably where Dundee came up with the idea to actually do this. So it's Adrian Street versus Terry Taylor for the television title. And it kind of starts off like your normal average Adrian Street match and or segment. Normal and whatever that means when you're talking about Adrian Street. I still hate the canned music they're using for Adrian on the network. It's so bad. It sounds like one of those goofy tunes they would play in sitcoms that take place in Italy or France. But that's beside the point. I think what made this whole thing work is the complete and polar opposite dynamics of the personalities between Taylor and Street. You've got Terry Taylor, the super serious, buttoned-down, good-looking, heterosexual babyface that everybody loves. And then you have Adrian Street, who is... well, he was Adrian. Look at him. It's exactly what David Crockett would say. So Adrian's out there just trying to do the mental mind game chicanery. Taylor's trying to wrestle him down to the mat, but Street's doing all this twirling and prancing and skipping around, which is visibly frustrating Taylor because he's like, the fuck is this idiot doing? So he finally starts to get more aggressive, and Street kind of responds to that. And he takes over for a little bit and legitimately starts stretching Taylor like a pretzel. And as I'm watching this progress, I'm like, God, the money I would have paid to see Adrian Street versus Ronnie Garvin in the NWA. Can you imagine the amateur wrestling we'd have gotten between those two? Fucking incredible. And then while Ronnie has Adrian pinned down on the mat and trying to twist his nipples, you get Adrian reaching up and trying to do the same to Ronnie. Could have gotten some quirky shit. But I'm beating around the bush. We finally get to what makes this an all-time great segment. So Taylor starts to rally a comeback, and he eventually grabs a hold of Street. And before he can do anything else, Adrian grabs Taylor by the hair, and he proceeds to do the unthinkable. He forces his tongue down Taylor's throat as a means to cut him off. for lack of better terms, he sexually molested Terry right in plain view of God and everybody. And what makes the whole thing genius is that Taylor is so stunned and so caught off guard by what happened, as was everybody else. Street capitalized with a roll-up, and he pinned Taylor 1, 2, 3 to win the television title. And I have to say, the crowd response was one thing. The way Jim Ross and Joel Watts sold this on commentary, it was beyond impeccable. They're going absolutely ballistic. They cannot believe what they have seen perpetrated on camera. No joke, it may have legit been the first time JR or Joel Watts ever saw a dude making out with another dude. Times were different in the 80s. That's all I can say. Joel Watts' exact quote, "I've never seen anything like it. A man kissing another man." I mean, like, I mean, what else can you say? Here's the other thing, too, that makes this whole thing so remarkable. People might remember Adrian Street kissing Terry Taylor. I don't know how many people actually remember it being for the television title. In fact, that part was almost secondary in the grand scheme of things. I mean, they barely even mentioned that part afterward. They were still caught up in the idea that homosexuality was a thing in the 80s. Halfway joking. It's also the Deep South. Keep that in mind. They didn't necessarily condone that kind of behavior around this time. And we look at this stuff nowadays and we don't even cock our heads sideways about it. You know, this stuff has become so normalized in today's culture. But what a fucking brilliant segment. I mean, I look back at this and I'm still blown away with how the people reacted to it. The Irish McNeil fans were totally taken aback. One of the most marvelous book segments I've ever seen on a wrestling show. It's timeless. It never gets old. One of my favorite all-time Mid-South segments. Then, of course, after seeing all that, I had to sit through another 10 minutes of programming that was nowhere near the level of awesomeness that was a Taylor Street match. For example, Bill Dundee versus Jason Walker. This was not awesome. Nothing wrong with the match. It was perfectly sound. I love me some superstar Bill Dundee. But it was just nowhere near as memorable as anything we saw in the previous 5 minutes. Although there was a bit of irony to the timing of Dundee teasing that he was going to stomp Walker in the groin after we literally just saw two dudes making out in the previous match. There was a lot of homoerotic shit happening on Mid-South this week. I guess wrestling's kind of like that, isn't it? Dundee went over with a sleeper hold. Nothing else to say about it. Nor was there much to say about Magnum TA versus Steve Brinson. Aside from Ernie Ladd being on commentary, which is pretty much the only thing about the segment that was notable, is the big cat Ernie Ladd making his intentions known that he's after a North American title. 6'9", 300 pounds of him. His size 15E boot, he covers the ground he walks on. He's gonna take Magnum under the landing tree and dumb him down out of position. My Ernie impression's not great. Can we just get Ernie doing commentary every week? Shit, man. I mean, he was only out there for 2 minutes, but he was so great. And imagine if we got like 8 minutes of that. Better yet, 40. God, we get so many legendary quotes. Just have Ernie out there as a third wheel commentator. I would approve of that. I hate three-man commentary booths, but if Ernie Ladd is part of that crew, I'll take it. Oh yeah, Magnum won with the belly-to-belly. Then we had Dr. Death and Hercules versus the Fantastics. This was, Okay, I'm trying to be fair when I say this because I know we're talking about a period in Dr. Death's career where he was very green and inexperienced. And I like all four guys that were a part of this segment. I'm not going to say this was a horrible match, but it was very sloppy and not necessarily in a good way. It was chaotic, and I'm not entirely sure that anybody ever found their footing here. I mean, on paper, should have been a pretty formulaic deal where the Fantastics work from underneath to make a comeback on the two monster powerhouse heels. Instead, it was... Christ, I don't know. Clusterfuck. I mean, Dr. Death was just not clicking with either Bobby or Tommy in this match. Looked like he got really confused about where he was supposed to be and how he was supposed to take over at certain points. You know, by that same token, I don't think Bobby and Tommy were really communicating well with what he was supposed to do. So both teams were kind of at fault. All the while, the Fantastics are trying to do some double team shit at the end, but Hercules and Steve's reaction times weren't all that great. Just, I don't know, everything looked a step off from the opening bell. They were definitely rushed for time, so that certainly didn't help. They almost killed poor Hercules with a double back body drop right before the heat finish. Like, even the heat finish looked a bit weird in execution. 1 minute the Fantastics are running wild, and then in the very next frame, you see Bobby run directly into Dr. Death, who is now wearing a football helmet. His signature football helmet. And what makes the whole thing even more vague is that Carl Fergie clearly sees Dr. Death with his fucking helmet on. You see Hercules go to make a pin on Bobby Fulton, but Fergie doesn't take the time to be like, hold on, wait a sec. Why is Dr. Death wearing a football helmet all of a sudden? It's just one of those goofy referee burial moments that makes everybody look bad. Like, if Steve is going to use the helmet, he should have quickly disposed of it after he headbutted Bobby. That way the helmet wasn't in plain view when the official turned around. I don't know. Again, not a great segment. And kind of similar to what we talked about with the Midnights earlier. Like, them beating the Fantastics here just seemed very incongruous with the current booking. I mean, they're right in the middle of this hot feud with the Midnights over the tag straps. But several weeks after the contract angle, not only are they completely putting that all on the back burner, but now they're beating both of those teams in matches on television with completely separate programs. It's probably not an ideal time to be doing layered stories like that if the end goal isn't to put the Midnights and the Fantastics over. if you are going to beat them, don't have it be a pinfall situation. They do a count out or a DQ or something. Protect them. I think overall the story here is continual efforts at trying to restore faith in the territory. Here in the fall of '84, losing the dog obviously took a big hit on them, especially in a lot of those core markets that drew tickets for live events. The booking has been a lot better, that's for sure, especially compared to the summer. It is definitely less angle-centric in terms of the pandemonium you see on a weekly basis. Definitely compared to what we were seeing in, say, January, February, March, even April. I know everybody likes the chaos for the sake of chaos dynamic. It definitely makes for entertaining wrestling. That's why the Attitude Era is so nostalgic for people my age. But you still need structure. You still need focus. And that's what made Mid-South great. You had the perfect balance between both those categories. And not every show is going to be a home run. But you knew that you were guaranteed to see something memorable on just about every program. I.e., Adrian Street making out with Terry Taylor to win the television title. It's not a 40-man brawl or a guy shoving light tubes up somebody's anal cavity. But it certainly gets more of a reaction than those two things do. So this week had a little bit of an unconventional setup. Now, normally the World Class shows start with Bill Mercer plugging the card at ringside and people are still filing into the Sportatorium. But they actually started the show with Mercer in studio. And it took me a while to figure out what was exactly going on this week. Because when I saw Mercer in front of the monitors, I just kind of figured, oh, this must be a compilation episode. But I'm like 99% sure this was still a recently taped episode. Because I don't recall reviewing any of these matches. But it also threw me off because the opener this week was Steve Simpson versus Mark Lewin. And when I saw Mark Lewin with Gary Hart, I was like, wait a sec. When did Mark Lewin come back to the Dallas area? It's been like a full year since we've seen him on world-class television. So then I'm thinking, is this a taped match from 1985? Well, no, it can't be, because Simpson wasn't in World Class in 1985. So they literally brought back Mark Lewin to World Class just to work a 3-minute prelim match with Steve Simpson. Which, by the way, had every lazy World Class booked finish in the history of booked finishes. I will give you one guess. The answer was double count out when both guys brawled out to the floor. They did some stuff in the ring for a few minutes, and they went outside the ring and started brawling into the crowd. There was a very scary moment where Lewin went to grab a post that held up the ringside rope, and he came precariously close to smacking a woman in the face with it in the front row. Yeah, there's a lawsuit that World Class didn't need to be dealing with in 1986. There was also a spot where Simpson went to hit Lewin over the head with a chair a couple times. I wrote down, tremendously fake. It looked like he legitimately never swung a chair in his life. Which, looking back, this was probably the first time we've seen Simpson use a chair in World Class. So they did the usual thing where they both kept pulling each other off the ring apron. Then Bronco ended up counting them both out as they fought through the crowd. Twas lame as fuck. But it only went like 5 minutes, so I can't say it dragged the show down. They were in and they were out. Then we came back for Abdullah versus Brian Diaz. This one was only slightly less milquetoast than the opener. It was Diaz taking the beating for about 80% of the action. He got a brief flurry of offense when he had Abby trapped in the corner to throw down some punches. Then Gary ran a distraction so Abby could sucker punch Diaz in the throat. He wrapped some tape around his neck to choke him out. And then I have no earthly idea what the hell happened at this finish. Abby goes to drop an elbow on Diaz. And as he's rolling around on top of his stomach, you see Diaz trying to forcefully kick out before the 3, which, I mean, who even knows if that was the planned finish in the first place? All I know is that Diaz couldn't kick out because he had a 480-pound fat fuck laying on top of him. So after Bronco counts 3, Diaz just immediately gets back up and no-sells the elbow drop. And before I could write anything else down to speculate on what happened at the end, they just went to commercial. This, this type of confusing finish wasn't all that uncommon with World Class, where finishes kind of come out of nowhere, or guys are trying to kick out at 3.1. It always leaves you wondering if something else was planned to happen, or maybe the guy doing the job wasn't all that happy about it. I mean, I'm not saying Brian Diaz was an unprofessional prick trying to go into business for himself. I'm just skeptical, though. Like, anytime I see guys attempting to kick out or deliberately raise their shoulder at the 3 count, it always makes me wonder. Especially when there's no follow-up or story attached to it. But we keep things moving along as we revisit some of the Dingo Warrior stuff. They replayed the 6-man from a few weeks ago when Buzz Sawyer and Matt Bourne fucked over the Warrior in their match with the Von Erichs, which, as we remember, basically facilitated his face turn. Then he did that follow-up promo at the Sportatorium talking about how he's going to do what he's always done and continue to do what he does best. And we still have no idea what that means. So after they went through all the initial footage, they showed another Dingo Warrior promo from Fort Worth. And here he was stumbling over himself, talking about how Bourne and Warrior tried to make him look stupid the other week. To which I simply noted, "No, Jim, you're doing a great job making an idiot of yourself right now by bumbling over your words." But then the promo gets even worse, if you can believe that. Because then he starts going off on how he was willing to share the 6-man belts with Bourne and Sawyer before they fucked him over. But now, he's not going to share anything. He and his new tag team partner, Steve Simpson, are going to take the World Tag Team belts and put them around their waists. So in essence, you are still going to share That would be the entire purpose of what tag team championships are. They are two titles that are meant to be shared amongst two men. Fucking pea-brain. I don't know what else he said here. I kind of zoned out after that point. He got jumped by Bourne and Sawyer for a minute until Simpson ran out to make the save. For the record, I have no idea when or how Simpson and the Dingo Warrior became tag team partners. If it's a reflection on everything happening from a booking standpoint in 1986, probably wasn't a whole lot of thought put into it. So it doesn't matter. Then we pitched back to Fort Worth for another pre-tape match. And this one was quite special. Not just the match, but everything that happened after the fact. It is the Crusher taking on the Mighty Zulu. Crusher being the early incarnation of Bam Bam Bigelow, if you missed last week's review, when he and Larry Sharp cut that epically goofy WWF-style promo. Unfortunately, Bam Bam wasn't chewing on an empty Coke can this week. He was wearing a sleeveless shirt with a print that read, "I am Monster." You heard that right. Not, "I am a monster." Just, "I am Monster." Beautiful. Grammar not important. So before they rang the bell to start this thing, Sharp got on the house mic and talked about how he tried to communicate with Zulu to bring him on board as part of his crew, but Zulu's been ducking him. So as he tries to recruit Zulu one last time, Zulu tells him no way. Then Sharp tells the Crusher to show no mercy and beat the shit out of him. So the Crusher wiped the floor with him and took him to school. Admittedly, Bam Bam was not very good in this match. His offense looked very sloppy at times. Yet he was still a million times more competent than the Mighty Zulu. But as I'm sitting there watching this match unfold, it's sometime around the 6 or 7 minute mark. I'm like, this has been going on for a while. How long is this fucking match? By the time it was over, it had just surpassed the 11-minute mark. If you can picture in your head what a green Bam Bam Bigelow versus Mighty Zulu match might look like on paper, it was at least 10 times worse than what you're imagining. When people say that Bam Bam Bigelow ranks among the all-time great big men workers in history, it is a true testament to his level of improvement in such a short time window. Because his performance in this match was less than stellar, borderline horrendous at times. So after the Crusher won, Larry Sharp came in to admonish Zulu some more. And, well, as he and Crusher left to go to the back, it looked as if they were given the impression that Zulu might actually be contemplating joining Sharp. So you're thinking, okay, so they're going to leave us with a little bit of a mild cliffhanger. And they kept us guessing for all of about 10 seconds. Because then they pitched to another pre-tape where we now see the Mighty Zulu in the ring with Sharp and Crusher. And, well, now he's aligned with them. Just completely out of the blue, approximately 1 week later, he's now a heel. And I believe he is now going by the name Zulu Zadafi, now sporting white face tattoos. It was also at this point where we were informed that he would be wrestling Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at the Cotton Bowl, to which I noted, well, that'll be a real challenge for Ricky. Can he work his magic and get something halfway watchable out of Zulu? Now, the thing I found most interesting was when they mentioned Zulu would be wrestling Steamboat at the Cotton Bowl, I was like, wait a minute. Ricky was in the middle of his WWF run during this time. I mean, we're quite literally weeks away from him challenging Randy Savage for the Intercontinental Championship and setting up that whole program that led to their match at WrestleMania 3. So then I thought about it for a minute. And I never pieced any of this together until they mentioned Steamboat wrestling for World Class. Because I completely forgot that Steamboat worked in Dallas for a cup of coffee in 1986. There's a real big angle they shoot after the first Steamboat Savage TV match where Savage destroys Ricky's throat with the ring bell and puts him out of action for like 3 months. And I think that was around the point where Steamboat came in to work the Cotton Bowl show while still in the middle of selling the throat injury for that WWF angle. And I'm like, wow. You know, it's a good thing the internet didn't exist back in the late 80s. Because there is no way they could get away with that shit in 2025 without people asking questions. And let's be honest, too, nobody would even think twice about it now. The other thing, too, is WWF fans in 86 weren't watching World Class unless they were tape trading. And we're talking a very, very small fraction of fans that would have been doing that. Like a 0.1%. So they could get away with this kind of stuff back then. But it was still very risky to do. Especially when kayfabe was still taken very seriously around this time. And I just think, too, God, of all people for Steamboat to work by bringing him into Dallas, they put him in the ring with the Mighty Zulu. Good Christ. What a wasted opportunity. But finally, we arrive at the TV main event. It's Rick Rude and the Dingo Warrior taking on Kevin and Mike Von Erich. So, I'm not even going to try to make sense of why the fuck Warrior is teaming with another heel after they literally just turned him face in the last 2 weeks. It makes no sense. But I don't care enough to make a big stink out of it. Company was about to fold in 3 years' time anyway. None of this matters. The Dallas faithful are few and far between for this week's taping block. But they were still a rowdy and passionate bunch for the Von Erichs. As boring, dry, and monotonous as the match was, hey, the Von Erichs are involved. And they're megastars. So the people are into it. It's like watching a WWE match in 2025. The matches by and large suck. But if you're a big star like CM Punk or Roman Reigns or Cody Rhodes, John Cena, Brock Lesnar, whoever the fuck is in there, the match can be the lamest, most lethargic match in the history of mankind. None of it matters when you're over and when you're a star. Always remember that. Let me also try and be fair. When Rude and Kevin were in the ring working together, the match was perfectly fine. Anytime Mike or the Dingo Warrior got involved, it weighed everything down considerably. And, well, going back to what I mentioned earlier about uncreative, overdone, lazy, world-class finishes, it's one thing to do a double countout, but another one of their favorite finishes to pull out of the hat was, let's DQ one of the heels right as things are starting to get going in the closing minutes. This is what they came up with. Kevin puts Rude in the claw hold, and Rude's reaching around desperately trying to get to the ropes, but in realizing that he won't be able to reach the ropes, he decides to sucker punch Ralph Poley in the head to knock him out. So the heels get disqualified. This also angered the Dingo Warrior as he got in Rude's face like, the hell was that all about? So then those two get into a fight on the floor. And I'm just sitting there watching all the post-match unfold, and I'm looking around at the hundreds upon hundreds of empty seats in the Sportatorium thinking, this is really what we've come to with World Class here in the fall of '86. We have officially hit the bottom of the barrel. This was truly an eye-opening episode. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that happened, granted. But with almost everything I saw, I just kept coming back to one simple question. Why? Why is any of this stuff happening? Why is Zulu now a heel? Why is he aligned with Larry Sharp and the Crusher? Why is the Dingo Warrior teaming with another heel after they literally just turned him babyface and spent a whole segment talking about how his new mission statement is to do things his way? How does Rick Rude randomly now have a valet that nobody's ever heard of? Moreover, why do they continually go back to the well with the same overdone, lazy finishes that we've seen 1,000 times in the last 6 months? Have they really reined it in that much? These are just a handful of questions that I have. Rhetorical, although I think I know the answer. The answer is, these people have no clue what they're doing. It just continues to exemplify the downturn of the territories. And what we're seeing with World Class here in '86 is only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, within the next 5 or 6 years, the majority of all the major territories would be long gone. By the time all the territories were either bought out or run into obscurity with bad management, it left us with only 2 major wrestling organizations in the early to mid-'90s that were not great shows worth getting excited about. I'm sure you could throw ECW in there, but talking about the 2 big promotions, it really does make me think as a natural pessimist. You know, as much as I love pro wrestling and love to go back and watch these classic tapes, as much as I love the element of what this profession is, there's a ton of horrible, horrible shit too. Like, probably more bad shit than we're willing to give it credit for. From the time we started doing these reviews on the channel several years ago, I mean, we started covering the territory tapes with Mid-South and World Class going back to late 82, early 83. And we're up to 1996 with WWF Raw. That's what? 14 years amongst all the different eras and companies we're currently talking about. And there's been some great stuff. 1983 World Class was off the charts. 1984 Mid-South, we've talked about that. It's been a hell of a year for the most part. 1986, 87 NWA was great. But there's been a massive amount of bad shit too. And I think if we're willing to actually sit down and be practical, it's probably like 70-30 in terms of comparing the good versus bad material. The bad being the 70 percentile and the good being the 30. And the only reason I'm doing this tangent is because I've recognized how bad things have been in World Class ever since probably mid to late 85. I mean, I really started noticing a change with the product sometime around the summer of last year when the shows were mainly boring and it was just the same handful of guys wrestling in the main events every week. But at least at that point, you still had the Von Erichs around. Gino and Chris were still a hot pairing. Bruiser Brody was making his occasional appearances. You still had the Midnights and the Fantastics around too. But man, a lot has changed in the last 12 months. That huge crop of talent that went to the UWF. I mean, the shows at this point have become increasingly unwatchable. And as much fun as I've had doing these reviews, it's been 3.5 years of world-class territory coverage. We've really seen the foundation crack here at the tail end of 86. It's a lot worse than people think. But we've only got a couple more months to go. And then we'll simplify these Friday shows to the NWA and Mid-South. Probably for the better. So on that note, I'm going to wrap everything up here. I want to thank everybody for checking out the Friday show, and we'll be back this coming Monday for Retro Raw. I don't think I have any other announcements. So we will leave it on that note. Thanks everybody for checking out the podcast, and I'll catch you all soon. Take care. Peace out.